west coast of America, California. 1,100 miles of Pacific Ocean coastline. Yet one place here is unlike any other. Because right here, on Mother's Day, May 2004, these seas ran red with blood. May 9th, 2004. A tourist boat sets out from the small harbour town of Moss Landing into the cold waters of Monterey Bay. The unsuspecting passengers on board were about to witness something extraordinary. This film is a reconstruction of what happened next, based on eyewitness accounts and actual video footage from the day. It is a remarkable story of survival.
All your eyes are important now. From this minute
The
on,
boat's
start
captain
looking.
was Heidi
We
Tiora.
often get dolphins in here. Most of the mornings are overcast.
Tiora ran a tourist business,
Like most of our
taking
days,
groups of
I
would-be nature watchers out onto the bay.
keep those eyes scanning the water.
Her passengers had high hopes.
There were a number of people on the boat. Many of them were family groups, and there were some small children. And then there were older children like me celebrating Mother's Day with their mother.
It would be a Mother's Day they would never forget. Less than a mile from shore and 5 short minutes from the harbour, they were already in deep water. Below the boat, a vast rock trench, in places deeper than the Grand Canyon, runs for about 60 miles. Much of what is down there remains unknown. At 9:57 a.m., Tiora's first mate spotted something ahead. From over a mile away, it was impossible to tell quite what that something was.
We saw some splashing ahead of us, and oh, I was so excited. I said, hey, great, we've got something ahead of us.
All that was clear was that that something was splashing on the surface, and that something was big. As the boat drew closer, the feeling of excitement on board grew.
Everybody got charged up and started to move forward, and they were real excited.
Slowly the activity began to take shape. Tall black fins rose from the waves like sails. They were over a metre high. Only one animal had dorsal fins that way. Orcas, otherwise known as killer whales.
I was ecstatic when we heard that there were orcas out there. I've been waiting years and going on these trips for years, waiting to see the orcas.
This was something special. Although orcas were known to frequent Monterey Bay, sightings were very unpredictable. Even Steve Johnston, a local veteran whale watcher, had never seen the bay's top predators.
When I heard that there were orcas out in front, I got really excited because I've never seen them before in the wild. This was my very first time, and that wasn't one of the things that I had on my list of expectations.
By 10:03, the whole boat could clearly see the killer whales.
Everybody went running to try to get a view, and I got up near the front of the boat. And we could see a lot of activity in dorsal fins and some jumping and thrashing around, so they were pretty active.
At first, the children on board were excited. It looked like the orcas were playing.
We saw lots of thrashing, lots of killer whales jumping.
They were acting kind of rambunctious and jumping out of the water and coming down again.
From over 100 meters away, the activity looked innocent enough. Even to Tiora, who had been on this water more often than anyone else on board.
quite often when they get together, they will just kind of gather and play, and I thought that's what we might be seeing up ahead of us.
But as she edged the boat closer, it became clear that this was not play. The time was 10:05.
But I slowed down, and this activity started to take on a more sinister tone. There was a blow that erupted from the gathering of killer whales that was far too big.
When any marine mammal comes to the surface to breathe, it exhales a spout of gas and water into the air, just like a human snorkeler. The size of the spout is related to the size of the animal. And this exhalation was far too large to have been caused by a killer whale.
That blow was way too big, so clearly it was not coming from killer whales.
A fully grown male orca can be up to 9 meters long and 6 tons in weight. But the exhalation Tiora had seen belonged to something much, much bigger. Something that dwarfed her boat. Whatever was underneath them, it was huge. Tiora tentatively inched her boat closer to try and get a better look at what was in the water. It was 10:07.
Then as we got closer, I could see what it was. It was a California gray whale cow.
The California gray whale is one of the largest animals on the planet. A fully grown female, known as a cow, can easily weigh up to 35 tons, the equivalent of 11 female African elephants. The barnacles encrusted on the upper surface of this creature's head positively identified it.
And then when we got a little closer, somebody yelled, I think it was Heidi that first realized that there were gray whales in the area, which is what had attracted the killer whales.
Gray whales and killer whales are not related. Orcas are in fact a type of dolphin. They are known as killer whales, not because they are whales, but because they are whale killers.
This was the attack that I never wanted to see.
One organization is specially equipped to reveal the dark mysteries of Monterey Bay. Marine biologist George Matsumoto had heard of killer whale attacks on grey whales, but even he had never seen one.
Even here at the Research Institute, where we'll spend 300 days a year on 2 different ships out there, we've never actually observed a killer whale attack from our vessels.
Up until now, reports of orca attacks were the stuff of legend, rarely glimpsed even by those who studied these animals. But the Mother's Day encounter would provide scientists with detailed video evidence of an attack from almost start to finish. 10:15. 18 minutes after they had first sighted the orcas, Tiora spotted another body in the water.
My goodness, you guys, look off the left side. Look over there.
In the midst of the mayhem, there was another, smaller participant.
And then we are told by Heidi that the orcas are attacking a gray whale and a baby.
Judging by the size of this calf, it was around 3 months old.
We'll call the Coast Guard.
There was nothing anyone could do.
Look at that little baby.
The passengers could only watch in horror and fascination.
You don't really want to watch, but you have to because you want to know what's going on.
No, your mothers can understand. Oh!
truly, this was one of the most powerful things any of us on board had ever seen.
And orcas are so tough. But see how they're going after its fluke tips and the little pectoral flippers?
The killer whales were thrashing their tails at it.
The killer whales were trying to prevent the calf from breathing. They were trying to drown it.
One swam up over its head and pushed down and was pushing it down. And you can't, you know, these are mammals, they have to breathe.
A grey whale can hold its breath for up to 15 minutes.
Oh my God.
But not when it's being repeatedly forced into water.
There was a moment when it tugged at my heartstrings that this mom was, fighting for the life of her baby.
Grey whales are ferociously protective parents, but they have little defense against a prolonged attack. But how have these two mighty adversaries come together so close to the harbour? Environmental journalist Dick Russell knew that grey whales were only ever fleeting visitors to the area.
They've just come from one of 3 lagoons in Baja California where the baby whale was born probably 4 months earlier. And they're about to head 6,000 miles all the way to the Bering Strait between Alaska and Russia.
Grey whales have one of the longest migrations of any mammal on Earth. It's a massive 14,000-mile trip from Alaska to Mexico and back again. Throughout their great voyage, the grey whale sticks to shallow water, hugging the coastline. They use the kelp beds and surf noise to disguise their presence from predators. But in Monterey Bay, the kelp beds run out. They have little choice but to break cover and run a 23-mile gauntlet across open water. Straight over Monterey's unique submarine canyon.
Here in the middle of the bay is the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. And also right here is the start of the Monterey Submarine Canyon. And the Monterey Submarine Canyon is a phenomenal feature. It cuts the bay in half. It goes away from shore 100 kilometers, reaching a depth of almost 4,000 meters by the time it hits bottom.
Even if the whales stayed in the shallows, they would still have to cross the deep water of the canyon. But perhaps there's another reason why the whales take a shortcut across the mouth of the bay. This place was once home to a much more formidable predator. Could grey whales retain a sixth sense of Monterey Bay as a place of danger?
100 years ago or more, the main predator of gray whales was still human beings. Gray whales were almost driven to extinction in the 19th century. They were hunted mercilessly. In the lagoons in Baja California, right there in their birthing grounds, in places like Monterey, the baleen was used, the oil was used. It was really just a bloodletting.
After the Californian grey whale's breeding grounds were discovered in the 1850s, the animals were hunted to near extinction. By the 1920s, only a few hundred individuals remained. The industry became uneconomic, and whaling in Monterey Bay ceased. But could memories of those dark days live on in the minds of today's migrating grey whales?
So maybe there's some kind of memory, who knows, a genetic memory in the whales, some of the whales that says we don't want to get too close to shore.
There may be a more pressing reason for the mother's risky decision to take a shortcut. Desperation born of hunger.
The mother probably hasn't eaten since she was last on the feeding grounds, which was way back last fall, last October. And now here it is May, and she's running maybe a little late, and her energy supplies are dwindling perhaps more than she wants them to be. And so she's decided that she's got to go across that canyon to save time.
The strategy will backfire. It's 10:41, 38 minutes since Tiora arrived at the scene. Her mother and calf are in obvious distress. This rapid blooming is the whale equivalent of panting. They are, quite literally, gasping for air. It doesn't help that at this stage of their journey, the mother is significantly weakened. One man who understands more than most about the rigors of their epic journey along the coast is marine biologist Wayne Perryman.
Their tanks are starting to run on empty. You can see the females are very, very thin. They're lactating and feeding their calf while they're fasting, so they're pouring out energy in an area where they can't eat. So they're very hungry as they go northbound.
Not only has the mother not eaten for months, but she has since given birth and nurtured her 2-ton baby, further draining her precious energy reserves. By 10:57, the attack on the weakened individuals was intensifying.
It just kept getting more frenzied and more frenzied.
Orcas hunt like wolves in packs.
They were obviously in communication with each other in some way because they were just precision like a drill team. And they were all in a line, and when they'd come out of the water, they'd come out as one.
This coordinated hunting strategy was well known to marine biologists like Nancy Black. On that Mother's Day, Black too was out on the water in a different part of Monterey Bay. Flashback to 9:53. Just 4 minutes before Tiora first spotted fins in the water, Black was trailing a pod of killer whales.
When they're first searching for gray whales, sometimes the killer whales can be spread out over maybe 10 or more miles in the area. And then when one of the groups of killer whales locates a gray whale, then all of a sudden sometimes you'll see other killer whales just porpoising in from a distance.
Suddenly 2 killer whales appeared right in front of her. Then a third, then a fourth, then more. These animals were preparing for something. Black backed off. Everywhere Black looked, orcas were appearing. They were responding to some sort of signal. She could only presume that they had been alerted to a kill by other orcas somewhere in the bay.
So obviously they've heard this and listened for it, and there's not competition. It seems to be the killer whales are working together, and probably having extra help is an advantage.
Without warning, the orcas suddenly picked up speed and headed east. Black knew something special was up, and before speeding off to pick up assistance, she radioed her sightings to her colleague, Richard Turnillo.
Richard, they're up here at about 2 o'clock.
Turnillo's boat was 15 miles away with another group of tourists when the call came in. But having run natural history trips for 25 years, Turnillo knew that this was an extremely rare chance to see a killer whale attack at first hand.
Our other boat was whale watching, along with our research boat, and they had come across an attack. So they called us and we went over and looked. I mean, it's, for a lot of people, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see one of the greatest predation events on Earth.
One passenger on board that day was local professional bird guide, Roger Wolfe.
We've been having a pretty good day. Everybody was real excited. And then the call comes in over the radio.
Hello? What's up?
Richard, they're up here at about 2 o'clock.
And 9:58, Tornillo changed course and headed for new coordinates. Even travelling at 13 knots, it would take him over 3/4 of an hour to get there. But the eyewitness reports from this boat were to prove invaluable.
We were quite a ways from the scene at that time. We had to go under power for a good, half hour, 40 minutes in order to get to that location.
It was now exactly 56 minutes since Tiora's boat had first arrived on the scene.
And as we approached the scene, we could see lots of splashing off in the distance, a lot of thrashing and splashing from quite a ways off.
The attack had now been going on for over an hour. Wolf began to decode what was happening in the sea ahead.
And the closer we got, then we began to see the dorsal fins of the killer whales, particularly the really 6-foot-tall dorsal of a male killer whale.
Less than 100 meters away now, Tornillo carefully maneuvered his larger boat closer to the carnage than Tiora had been prepared to risk. This particular day of the attack shows just how close eyewitness Roger Wolf was to the battle scene. And from this angle, Wolf was able to see something different. Supercharged headbutting.
For the most part, it seemed to consist of very intense body blows and headbutts. We would see the killer whales come in and hit the calf, and at the same time, we'd see their dorsal fin shake with the impact. And the blow out of their blowhole would be more intense upon impact.
This ramming was not just winding the calf, it was causing major internal damage. Dr. Frances Gulland is the Director of Veterinary Science at the Californian Marine Mammal Center. She knows from previous victim examinations just what sort of damage can be done.
But when the orcas attack the grey whale calf, they actually ram the animal sort of again and again, repeatedly bumping into its side. And that type of aggressive ramming, blunt trauma, essentially breaks blood vessels, and the calves bleed into the subcutaneous tissues. So they bleed into the muscle and the blubber underneath the skin.
It was no wonder then that this mother was using every ounce of her strength and all of her wits in a supreme effort to protect her baby.
The mother was doing everything she can to absorb the blows and keep the calf away from the killer whales.
But how could one mother single-handedly keep killer whales from taking her baby down? It's now 10:08, and Nancy Black has arrived with video equipment. The combination of video footage and close-up photographs was to prove crucial in the later analysis. By photographing the dorsal fins, Black hoped she would be able to identify the individual attackers. It was only later, when she was able to cross-reference these images with the fins already catalogued in her comprehensive database, that she was able to confirm the precise identity of the attackers.
We photograph the killer whales to identify the individuals. I always take a photograph just to document it.
As it turned out, she knew them well.
The ones that we saw that day, I can tell mostly because I know all the individuals now. So I know, I knew who those were.
Cross-referencing those individuals with her notes, Black confirmed that the attackers had been there in numbers.
That day there was quite a large group. There's about 12 killer whales, which is at least 2 family groups together.
She had seen these groups many times in the bay, but never before working in conjunction. By 11 o'clock, all 3 boats were now on site, each watching the heavyweight combat from different vantage points. By now, the tide had turned against the grey mother and calf.
At this point, the mother and calf gray whale are kind of just stopped there. They really can't get away now too quickly. The killer whales are blocking them from the front and from the sides. The mother could easily escape if she wanted to and just take off, but she doesn't do that. She stays very protective of her calf.
The mother attempts to get her calf out of harm's way by pushing it up out of the water and onto her belly.
You look over and you see the calf, and it looks like the calf is sitting on top of the water.
The Californian grey whale mother was attempting to balance 2 tons of infant on her underside.
The calf's rolled onto her chest, and she's rolled onto her back, and she's holding it up out of the water so the killer whales can't get to it.
But she can't sustain this position for long. Turned upside down, she must hold her breath, even while soaking up the power of the orca's heavy blows. This battling maternal drive is well known to environmental journalist Dick Russell.
Just imagine what this mother whale has to do in order to protect this young one. She's got to fight off this pack in whatever way she can with all the strength that she has. I mean, she weighs, 30 tons. So she's much bigger than an individual orca. But orcas are ferocious, and keep in mind that the gray whale has no teeth. She's a baleen whale. And there's a pack of wolves upon her and trying to get at the baby.
Killer whales are armed with a set of 50 ferocious teeth, especially adapted to the tail. Each calf is too big for the orcas to bite into the blubber. But from studying the carcasses of other grey whale victims, scientists knew that ultimately they were after something else.
The parts that are eaten first are the soft parts, the parts that are easy to pull off. The tongue is a very vulnerable piece. It's a nice, soft, fatty thing that they can rip off.
The orca's main prize is the protein-rich baby grey whale tongue. It's enough to make a meal for a family of 5. Dr. Francis Dillon has conducted necropsies on the dead bodies of many grey whale calves and had a good idea of the likely outcome.
What we expect to see in a grey whale calf after it's been attacked by an orca is a lot of bruising under the skin and into the blubber as a result of the orca actually ramming into the side of the calf.
But it's not the force of the ramming alone that damages the victim. It's the trauma.
As the orcas attack, that in itself could kill a grey whale calf due to the stress. And they're very sensitive to stress, and they'll produce a lot of adrenaline and corticosteroids. And those hormones can cause contraction of heart muscle, so that the animal actually has a heart attack and dies from heart failure. So the stress could kill the animal before the hemorrhages do.
The orcas are steadily wearing down the terrified calf. In desperation, the mother employs her only weapon, her massive tail.
She's actively thrashing about with her tail. In fact, we do see her land a few blows with her big tail flukes on the killer whale several times.
The tail flukes of a fully grown female grey whale are over 3 meters wide and can weigh 180 kilos.
In fact, we even see the calf make aggressive maneuvers, trying to slap it with the side of its head and using its flukes to try and slap the killer whales too.
But this flailing counterattack has little chance of success in the face of so many attackers. On Tiara's boat, Debbie DeVos noticed something new about the orca's behavior: organization.
It was impossible for the mom and baby to make a getaway and run away. They were sort of corralled there and surrounded.
This is a coordinated attack strategy. Simultaneous attacks on a cow and calf from both sides at the same time.
You've got 3 of them on one side.
There was nowhere to turn, and the staggered formation strikes were taking their toll.
The mom was obviously getting tired, as was the baby.
From her inflatable, Nancy Black was trying to keep count of the fast-moving orcas.
You know, some of the killer whales are missing. They must be somewhere around here.
While 6 orcas maintained their assault, another 6 had disappeared from her view. From the perspective of the other 2 boats, their whereabouts soon became clear.
They separated into 2 groups and would actually circle around and come from 2 different sides to attack.
From where he was watching, Roger Wolf saw a developing pattern of behavior.
There were 2 teams. One team would be in there actively just pounding the heck out of the whales, and the other team, the other killer whales, would be off to the side, and we could see them. They were over there re-oxygenating, breathing, trying to recover until it was their turn to come back in.
The orcas had formed a tag team, ensuring there would be no let-up in the onslaught. What the witnesses were seeing firsthand was the clearest evidence yet of strategic intelligence. Going over the footage later, Nancy Black was able to confirm just how sophisticated the orcas' behavior was.
The killer whales are really coordinated. They're like a team working together. There's a lot of communication going on. And there's a killer whale right next to it. You can see its pectoral fin of the killer whale's actually trying to push the calf away from its mother, because that's one of their tactics. They need to get the calf separated from its mother in order to really kill the calf.
Despite the apparent chaos in the water, the orcas are using precision methods to separate the 13-meter-long adult grey from her calf. But it's not easy.
The mother kind of plasters the calf right next to her side there and does not leave it.
In spite of her size, the mother grey whale is agile, constantly rolling her 35-ton bulk to prevent the orcas from isolating her calf.
It's harder if the mother is right there because she's huge.
But at 11:35, and despite the danger from the mother's tail flick, one orca makes an audacious move.
There's a killer whale just trying to get in between the mother and calf there, trying to use her flukes to push her way between that mother and calf. It's pretty sad to watch, but of course it is part of nature.
By now, the struggle was moving into its 3rd hour.
It seems to me there's no way this calf has got a chance. I mean, it looks like the killer whales are going to get this calf. There's no escape for it.
For many of those on board Tiara's boat, what had started as a pleasurable day out on Monterey Bay had turned into a nightmare.
What we saw was so painful. It was so brutal. Several people were trying to photograph this, but they just didn't have the stomach for it, and they just put their cameras away.
Oh, God.
The outcome looks bleak, and for many of Tiora's passengers, it's become too much to bear.
Yeah, I think it's got some internal injuries.
Oh, God.
The orcas are biting the fins and tail flips of the calf and dragging it away from its mother's side. The sea is running red with blood.
Oh.
By 11:40, the combined and coordinated efforts of the orcas succeeded in dragging mother and baby apart.
It was really sad because you just see them separated and you think, how would I feel? I would be really scared because if someone was like trying to take me away from my mom, it would be really scary.
word of the orca attack spread from Moss Landing to the whale-watching community of Monterey. In the aftermath, interest in the incident grew, attracting both local and national attention. Reporters rang in to speak to those who had witnessed the attack. But the real story was only just beginning. As the shock waves from the events of Mother's Day were still reverberating, there came a startling report. On May 13th, in the early hours, another battered grey whale calf had washed ashore on the beach at Moss Landing. It had all the hallmarks of the Mother's Day incident. Amid all the speculation, one scientist, George Matsumoto, sought to prove a link between the two attacks and discover why this bewildering behavior was apparently only happening here in the bay.
But one of the things that is being postulated is that we've got killer whales, a pod of killer whales, lying in wait right over here, waiting for the gray whales as they cross back and forth on the migratory pathway, mostly as the whales are coming up north.
The killing continued. Over the following weeks, reports of copycat attacks on grey whales became an almost daily occurrence. As news of the killer whale attacks spread from Moss Landing across America, even greater numbers of people began arriving in the hope of seeing this brutal behavior for themselves.
Whales are up here on the left.
Alright, hit it. Hit it. They were rarely disappointed. Alright, hit it. Hit it. As business boomed in Monterey, the scientists turned yet again to the video evidence of the Mother's Day attack in the pursuit of answers.
After the Mother's Day event, we had more attacks and, several per week. We were kind of overwhelmed with it because you're out doing research, you're getting up early and staying out late. There was at least 16 predation events that we knew about. There could have been others that we could have missed as well, which is really high. Finally, we realized that, this is something really unprecedented that had never happened before. It was an exceptional year.
But neither by re-examining the Mother's Day footage, nor by witnessing similar attacks, could Black explain the explosion of violence that spring. She called fellow marine biologist Wayne Perryman, who had been conducting an annual census on the migrating grey whales at nearby Piedras Blancas.
Right away, Nancy was saying that they're seeing a fair number of killer whale attacks, so we were keeping our eyes open to see if we'd see killer whales down in our area.
Perryman didn't see killer whales, but while counting the migrating grey cow-calf pairs as they passed close to shore, he did notice something surprising.
As the counts began, we were getting, good numbers. We're seeing 10, 15 cow-calf pairs a day early in the migration. It increased up to about 25 a day as we got closer to the peak. Then all of a sudden it jumped up to where we were seeing 40 and 45 cow-calf pairs passing in a day, which is really unusual.
The change in 2004 was the number of gray whale calves. So the killer whales, obviously took advantage of that huge number of calves coming through and were here more frequently. So they really, used that situation in Monterey Bay to hunt the gray whales.
Well, I think that the word got out. The killer whales got on the gray whales. They found that there were large numbers of calves there, and they just began to aggregate in that environment because it was a rich feeding opportunity for them.
More grey whales meant more grey whale attacks. The orcas were drawn in by the unexpected abundance of food, but the grey whales were traveling 7,000 miles. Why had this behavior only been seen in the middle of Monterey Bay? The answer to that riddle lies in an understanding of the way orcas hunt.
Killer whales have echolocation, so they often will spread out maybe over a half a mile or so, kind of searching.
Grey whales have developed highly successful strategies to avoid detection.
because once the mothers and calves start crossing the bay, they go into this really kind of quiet swimming. Only sometimes you just see their blowholes. They hardly surface.
But when the greys are over the canyon, they are far more exposed. The huge chasm below them creates a sonic environment perfectly suited to the hunting pods of listening killer whales. Like U-boats using sonar to hunt down ships, the orcas prowl the waters over the canyon's edge, keenly listening out for the smallest amplified clues. Here a tail slap, where the briefest verbal communication is much louder.
Killer whales find them by listening, passive listening for the gray whales, because they kind of make a knocking sound sometimes to navigate. So they have a much higher advantage of ambushing them here in Monterey Bay than they do other places along their migration.
The attacks only happened in Monterey Bay because it was only here that the whales stopped hugging the coast and took a shortcut across open water. It was only here that the water was deep enough for the orcas to launch their attack. And it was only here, in Monterey Bay, where a unique submarine canyon acted as an echo chamber to aid their hunting. There was one further riddle surrounding the Mother's Day incident that remained unanswered. The attack had started around 9:50 and carried on until 1. More than 3 hours. Why had it lasted so long? Nancy Black went back to the tapes. By matching the video images with underwater hydrophone sound recordings made at sea, she looked again at the individual attackers.
If you put it on a computer, you know, the frequencies, the call types, the patterns are very different between the two.
Visually, the adult males were identifiable by their towering dorsal fins. At nearly 2 meters high, they're as tall as a man.
You can see the male killer whale in the background there. He's not really involved as much.
The dorsal fins she could see at the heart of the battle were smaller.
It's the adult females that are doing most of the work, even though there's others in the area.
By listening to the orcas' communications, Black heard something else, the higher pitched sound of juveniles.
And they're always making kind of playful sounds and, you know, lots of whistling.
The footage confirmed what she had heard. At the very center of the attack were juvenile orcas.
See the little juveniles in there? They're really close to the action, so they're probably observing and learning how to do this for the future.
Astonishingly, this was not a full-on attack. It was a training session. The orcas were showing their offspring how to make a kill.
It's a way for them to learn how to do this over their lifetimes, and eventually when they become adults, you know, they'll be able to participate, so it's like transmitted culturally throughout their group.
The orcas were taking their time, as if to make sure that the juveniles had learnt their lesson. But it was this deliberation that was to provide the mother and calf with their chance of escape. 11:41, the morning of the Mother's Day attack. The orcas are continuing their assault, but against the odds, the mother grey whale is reunited with her calf.
It was amazing that the mother had that kind of stamina, not to just give up.
The mother makes one last desperate attempt to escape. Just as the killer whales take advantage of deep water over the canyon, so the grey whales find sanctuary in the shallows. It was then that Tiora noticed something extraordinary.
Have you noticed we keep flowing in, we're moving in?
The mother grey whale, though under siege, was on the move, slowly and painstakingly nudging her calf towards shore and shallower waters.
It finally sunk into me. These animals are moving to the coast. They're headed in on the straightest route they can take to shallow water. When she takes her calf underwater, they're moving in, they're going east. Orcas don't like shallow water, and there's a chance that what they're doing is that mother's thinking if she can just feed into shallow water, maybe they can evade the orcas.
Meanwhile, on Tonello's boat, Roger Wolf had also identified the mother's new strategy.
Now, every time there was a break in the action between the two teams, the mother and the calf would start heading for shore.
But they were still over a mile from the coast, and the orcas had redoubled their efforts.
The baby was virtually being eaten alive.
Progress was painstakingly slow, and by now it was hard to see how the calf could possibly survive.
It appeared that maybe the baby was doomed. Heidi, our captain, decided that maybe we should leave the area about that time.
I was reluctant to go, but I wasn't sure I wanted to stay around and see the ending to this.
The other boats had come in, the Monterey boats had come in, and they were circling around and watching. I figured that we'd seen enough, I'd seen more than enough, so we took off.
I think everyone on the boat felt that they had witnessed something that they might never ever witness again, and maybe not want to witness again.
As Tiora headed for home, the passengers on board were left to reflect silently on all they had seen. Little did they know that the calf and mother that they had left behind were about to make a dramatic bid for freedom. 1302, and by now the two grey whales were within a mile of shore. The mother has maneuvered her baby away from the danger zone, but the calf has sustained terrible bachelor.
And so the question comes out, do they ever get away?
The mother knows she has just one chance to save her baby.
If the calf and the mother can get into 60 feet of water or less, the killer whales will break off the attack.
Less than 60 feet, and the orcas won't be able to build up sufficient momentum for ramming.
Of course, the next question is, how deep is it here? Quick look at the depth finder, 60 feet.
3 long minutes pass. And then suddenly, the killer whales break the surface and head back out into the bay. They have aborted their attack.
You know, this attack probably took 4 or 5 hours of all that energy expended, and the killer whales ended up with nothing.
After 3 hours of brutal assault, the cow and her calf are battered but still breathing. As long as they have managed to escape major internal damage, their chances of survival are good. Their story is one of a remarkable escape from almost certain death.
So this calf did survive, actually, on Mother's Day and headed back up to Alaska.
For the eyewitnesses, it had been a day they would never forget.
I was in a state of awe. This was something I never dreamed I'd be able to be an eyewitness to.
When we found out the next day that the mother whale and the baby had gotten away, we were just elated. It was wonderful, wonderful news, and that mother whale was a real fighter.
I had to really count my blessings that I had actually seen what I'd seen. It was a wonderful day. The experiences that I saw that day goes in my memory book, my scrapbook, as a special day.
bizarre series of mysterious and grotesque deaths is dividing a community. The killings lack any sort of motive. But as the body count escalates, the race is on to get inside the mind of the killer. Before conflict explodes into carnage. Pilanesberg National Park, South Africa. 212 square miles of protected nature reserve, set aside as a safe haven for wildlife. Yet rhinos in the park were turning up dead, killed by injuries that just didn't make sense. The man who had been in charge of protecting them was field ecologist Gus Van Dyke.
We started finding dead rhinos, and the guys who were on the ground alerted us and said something's not right. When an animal's poached, it's got a bullet hole in it and the horn is gone. In Pilanesberg, all the rhinos that we found were still intact and their horns were largely untouched.
The bodies were all in one piece. Poachers weren't killing these animals. Something else was. Humans are the adult rhino's only predator. But male rhinos will fight one another. Adult males are fiercely territorial.
So it's perfectly natural to expect that rhinos will kill each other.
But something about the corpses just wasn't right. There were deep gashes behind the head where the animal had bled out. In some, the shoulder blades were smashed and the back was broken. Not the type of wound you'd find in a rhino attack.
The nature of the injuries was wrong. The injuries that we were seeing here were injuries on the top of the neck and down the spine. And really, there's no real way that in a rhino fight, those injuries are going to be sustained.
When rhinos fight each other, they lower their heads and try to gore their opponents with an upward thrust of their immense horn. Any wounds turn below the shoulder into the underside of the head and belly. Yet the wounds on the dead Pilanesberg rhinos were on the neck and shoulders, and the blows had been inflicted downwards. Another rhinoceros could never reach that high.
This is not obviously rhino aggression. Something else is happening here.
Van Dyke was puzzled. If the blows were inflicted from above, it could only mean that the attacker was taller than the victim. But a fully grown rhino is over 1.5 meters high. What predator was taller than that? And what predator was powerful enough to take on 3 tons of fully grown male rhino? 1,700 miles to the north in Kenya, Amboseli National Park was also experiencing a spate of bizarre deaths. Only here, it wasn't rhinos that were turning up dead. It was cattle. Many were left with their intestines hanging out. For the third time in as many weeks, angry Maasai villagers had called out Soila Sayalel. Though she was a Maasai herself, it was a call she had always dreamed.
Torrono kule. Ore entoki nikias naa iking'uraa ake duo amu yiolo ajo lasima pee kihakikisha siyo.
The Maasai swore that an elephant had killed a cow.
Naa iking'uraa ake duo amu yiolo ajo lasima pee kihakikisha siyo kana orkanjawe. Nikiata sii enoshi pesa kejo orkanjaoni.
The Maasai were insistent. Sayalel recognized the footprints immediately as elephant tracks. 40 centimeters in diameter, the oval imprints were unmistakable. Like human fingerprints, the pattern of ridges left behind by the sole of elephant is actually quite distinct. But the sand here was too soft to leave an accurate impression. Sayalel and the Maasai men followed the tracks and soon found signs of a struggle. They had something else to show. When it attacks, an elephant's tusks make grooves in the earth. The marks are easy to spot. Around them, the red earth was stained crimson with blood. But why should elephants and cattle come into conflict at all? Like cattle, elephants eat only vegetation. They are not predators. And in the wet season, there is little competition for food. There was no obvious reason why an elephant would kill. Sayalel asked the Maasai to try and give her a description of any elephant spotted recently. It seemed just one. Villages weren't satisfied with paperwork. Cows are sacrosanct. They represent status, wealth, and the essence of the Maasai way of life. Unless someone was able to help them, was able to take action themselves. April 1994. The number of dead rhinos in Palandsberg National Park was continuing to escalate. The body count now stood at 21. Yet Gus Van Dyke was no nearer to finding their killer.
Frustratingly, we were still battling to build a complete picture because these rhinos were staggering around for a few days with their injuries and then dying. So we weren't able to piece the history together from the signs left on the ground.
Van Dyke was becoming increasingly concerned. But his luck was about to change.
We had an incident where we found 4 rhinos very quickly after each other in a very small area. And for the first time, we had fresh animals that we could look at and do proper post-mortems on.
For the first time, Van Dyke had an intact crime scene. He immediately called his trackers in to examine the evidence. Maybe at last they could build a complete picture of just what was happening. The 4 bodies were surrounded by elephant tracks. There were definite signs of aggression, scuffed footmarks, and broken branches.
And it was perfectly obvious that elephants were involved here.
The investigators carefully measured and photographed every trace. The rhinos and the elephants were clearly here at the same time. Fresh prints from both species intersected each other. Just like the ones in Amboseli, the prints measured around 40 centimeters across, giving a shoulder height of over 2.5 meters. Probably a large female or a juvenile male. For the first time too, the investigators had fresh injuries to examine. The shapes of the deep wounds were consistent with tusks over 1 meter long. At last, Van Dyke was hot on the trail. A 3-meter to hire a 3-ton killer. He mobilized the Pilanesberg Rangers.
Without absolute idea of which elephant was responsible, we went to the closest elephants that we could find to that incident. And we shot them.
Van Dyke knew that the perpetrator wouldn't have traveled far from the scene of the crime. There was a good chance that one of these 3 elephants was his killer.
That came under some criticism to such a drastic step, but what we did see immediately after that is that the killing stopped. And once the killing stopped, we patted ourselves on the shoulder and said, okay, we've got it right. We don't know why or how. We thought we could move on with our rhino conservation.
Life in Pilanesberg returned to normal for just over a year.
Suddenly, we started seeing the very same pattern reappear. Had we shot the wrong elephant? We had no idea, but all we knew is we had more carcasses.
The Pilanesberg killer was back and busy. In quick succession, new rhino corpses began to pile up. March brought 3 dead bodies. April, 5 more. By the end of May, the total body count was 49.
From 1 carcass a month, perhaps now we're finding 1 a week.
There was growing pressure to find the killer before the already endangered rhinos vanished from Pilanesberg National Park altogether. But it was 2 whole years before the culprit was caught in the act. A tourist who heard news of rhino deaths sent in photographs of an elephant in the park chasing a rhino. It is obvious to Van Dyke that the elephant is attacking.
This elephant, you can see, is absolutely focused on that rhino. His trunk's outstretched, he's crumpled up his ears. He's not trying to chase this rhino off or intimidate it. He's trying to catch it. And indeed, once he caught that animal, he killed it.
Once the elephant had caught the rhino, he gored it from above, straight into the shoulder blade.
Just pushing his tusks deep into the shoulders and breaking the back and the pelvis.
The elephant then used the weight of its head to crush the rhino, while driving its huge tusks through the body. The cause of death is clear, but a bigger question remained. Was this a single rogue animal that had somehow managed to escape detection? Or was it something deeper, affecting more than just one individual elephant? At Amboseli National Park in Kenya, elephant project manager Soila Sayalal was trying to answer the very same question. She has now recorded 185 more cattle deaths and collected dozens of eyewitness statements. Anywhere else, picking the culprit out of a lineup of more than 1,400 elephants would be difficult. But Amboseli's elephants are among the most studied in the world. Since 1972, the Amboseli Trust for Elephants has monitored the population's behavior, assembling identification records for each and every one of them.
We have 1,450 elephants, and all the elephants are known individually.
So Sayalel attempted to match the existing photo IDs with the eyewitness descriptions. In Pilanesberg, Gus Van Dyke was collating forensic photographs from the new rhino deaths. He identified something they all had in common. this differed from kill to kill. The implications were enormous. Van Dyke wasn't looking for one killer. There were lots of them. In Kenya, the pattern was a very different one. All the attacks here involved families of elephants. Silel suspects appeared to be mature females. Were the situations in Amboseli and Pilanesberg completely unrelated? Females repeatedly killing cows in Kenya. Males systematically killing rhinos in South Africa. Just what was going on in the minds of these elephants? Dr. Joyce Poole has been studying elephant behavior in Africa for more than 30 years. She is one of the world's leading elephant authorities and research director of the Amboseli Trust for Elephants. Dr. Poole had encountered elephant violence before.
I think it's much more aggravated now. We're seeing much more conflict, more aggressive, more violent sort of behavior on the part of elephants. So that's made us start thinking, what's going on here?
The Maasai continue to bear the brunt of this violence as more and more of their livestock are killed. Cattle are central to Maasai life. Their milk and blood is used for food. Their dung is used for plastering hut walls. So each death is keenly felt. Since 1997, the Amboseli Trust for Elephants has made consolation payments for lost livestock if the Maasai agree not to seek retribution. But in the past, they've taken matters into their own hands.
I suddenly heard in the background the sort of Maasai warrior call, and I thought, this is trouble.
An unknown elephant had killed a villager. The Maasai were after revenge.
When I went to get help, the Maasai crossed to the other side of the swamp and speared an elephant named Fenella.
The Maasai claimed they would spear 1,000 elephants. They speared 7. Fenella was one of the few survivors. The Maasai wanted to teach the elephants a lesson. In fact, they just made things worse. In Pilanesberg, Van Dyke was struggling with the rationale behind the rhino attacks.
Based on the tracks that had been found and just the nature of the injuries, the assumption was made that it was bull elephants. So we focused our attention on the bull elephant population of Pilanesberg.
It didn't help that very little was known about the Pilanesberg elephants. Most had been translocated from other parks in the 1980s.
Gus got in touch with me and asked if I could come down and have a look at what they were seeing and look at the statistics.
Dr. Poole suggested that Van Dyke try and piece together in-depth profiles of the Pilanesberg herd.
Work that had been done in Amboseli really highlighted the value of getting to know individual animals within a population.
So, drawing on what Poole and her team had learned in Amboseli, Van Dyke created independent profiles of every male elephant in the park to try and find those responsible.
It took a while, but we started building up a profile of each bull.
Each of the bull elephants was photographed and any identifiable markings recorded. As the data accumulated, one detail began to recur. All the attackers had something in common.
We started seeing a pattern, a very interesting pattern, and that is that the elephant bulls that were involved in aggressive encounters were in fact in must.
Must is when male elephants go into a period of heightened aggression and sexual activity. The temporal glands behind their eyes become swollen, causing a strong-smelling fluid, rich in hormones, to run down their cheeks. The secretions are a signal to other males that he is ready to fight to the death if necessary, to preserve his status and mating rights over the females. Testosterone levels can be 20 times greater than normal, and even the most placid male can become aggressive. Usually, this occurs when elephants reach their mid to late 20s and have left their family group. These young bulls in Landsberg were only 18 years old.
Here was an animal that was in must a full 10 years too early.
With this increased testosterone in their bloodstream, starting to behave aggressively.
We started seeing elephants that were more aggressive than one would expect, even if they were in must. A low tolerance of vehicles, tourist vehicles, for example.
Violence was spilling over into other areas of the park. But the rhinos still seemed to be the principal target.
These elephant bulls would approach rhinos, not aggressively at first, but just walk up to them and drape their trunks over the rhino's shoulders.
The action is the beginning of a sexual approach. A male elephant attempting to mate with a male rhino.
It looked so like sexual behavior gone wrong.
Not surprisingly, the advances are rejected. The elephant becomes frustrated.
And then the whole interaction escalated. These elephants gored these rhinos to death.
It seemed that this extreme sexual and violent behavior was being caused by massive levels of testosterone. But these juveniles shouldn't have been in must at all. Why was this hormone surge happening so early? The 12th of April, 2006. Inside Uganda's Queen Elizabeth National Park, the villagers of Katwe were working on their farms. Eli Asaf was carrying vegetables home to his family after a long day. He didn't see the danger coming. Eli tried to outrun his attacker, but an elephant was faster than a man. Before Eli reached the end of the field, the elephant caught him. He was gored to death. His good friend, Emmanuel Moate, saw it all.
When we got here, the whole place was elephants everywhere.
He was dead, but then they continued to play with him, pulling him, just playing with him.
The elephants removed all of Eli's clothes.
I found they had stripped him of all his clothes and they had pulled out his intestines.
The entire elephant family surrounded the naked body, turning the corpse and covering it with dirt. This bizarre behavior continued for nearly an hour.
The park officials had to shoot in the air to scare off the elephants, and that's when we got the chance to pick up the dead body.
Uganda has experienced elephant violence before, but those attacks were mainly the result of human confrontation. discovered Eli Asaf's tragic death were an omen of a much deeper and darker mystery within Queen Elizabeth National Park. Wildlife biologist Yves Abbé knows the Ugandan elephants better than most. After a military coup, General Idi Amin seized power in Uganda.
So help me God.
He began a violent reign of terror. The East African country went into a permanent state of war. Elephants became just another casualty. Ugandan soldiers stormed into forests and game parks, killing them for meat and ivory.
This was not just shooting one elephant. It was like throwing hand grenades at family groups, mass destruction. This was war. This was total war against these animals. And they just hack the ivory and go.
A whole generation of older elephants was wiped out. With no matriarchs or mature bulls, elephant family structure was totally destroyed. 95% of the elephants where Abe worked were slaughtered. Those that remained were a generation of youngsters left to fend for themselves. But is there any mental trauma for the animals that have lived through this type of violence? After 50 years of rescuing orphaned baby elephants, Daphne Sheldrick believes that there is.
They've lost their elephant family, and family is very important to an orphaned elephant, as it is to an orphaned human.
Her experiences give an intriguing perspective on the elephant's psyche.
I think an elephant that's raised on its own is going to be very mentally disturbed because they're so dependent, so utterly dependent on the family for such a long time.
The calves behave differently from others their age. Their eyes are dull. They spend a lot of time on their own, and they are reluctant to play. Many of them have experienced violence.
Most of the orphans come to us in a pretty bad state. Physical problems and, of course, emotional problems as well.
Most show some type of insecurity or withdrawal.
When they first come in, they have difficulty sleeping. A lot of them wake up screaming at night. One little elephant that was very newborn actually managed a trumpet in his dream. Suddenly this full-blown trumpet happened in the night and was so unusual that I actually went out to see what was happening. And this little guy was fast asleep.
A shrill trumpet call is a distress signal. A distress signal a baby elephant should be incapable of making.
Normally they can't trumpet until they're about 6 months old.
Sheldrick believes the baby calf was reliving a traumatic event from its past.
They definitely have flashbacks and dreams.
Though we can't know what an elephant is thinking, the traumatic events they've lived through are all too easy to verify. Africa's national parks were set up to protect wildlife like the elephant. But often, it has been at the expense of local communities. The Maasai have inhabited East Africa since the 15th century. But when Amboseli was declared a national park in 1974, both they and their cattle were moved out. Enraged, they looked for a way to draw attention to their predicament. They attacked a single that was precious to them. The African elephant. The elephant spearings were an effective protest against land loss, but may have started a violent cycle of retribution.
The idea of retaliation has been certainly been in my mind for a very long time. There have been so many stories where it would seem obvious that it's revenge.
Certainly, violent interaction between humans and elephants has escalated. Yet most of it. Joyce Poole believes the elephants recognize that the cows belong to the Maasai.
Some people have found it a leap even to suggest that elephants can make that association. But of course they can make that association.
The Amber Selly case studies appear to support that connection. A significant majority of the female elephants known to have attacked Maasai cows have been victims of Maasai violence in the past. One such elephant is 38-year-old matriarch Odile.
A group of warriors mobilized themselves. They found Odile and her group in the swamp, and they started chasing them out. She tried to get hold of a Maasai, but when the other guys saw that, they went and she was speared 7 times.
Photographic evidence shows the extent of Odile's injuries. But what happened next was tragic.
Odile saw her calf being speared.
It did not survive. Sayalel and her team have noticed a definite change in Odile's behavior since the death of her baby.
She's not okay. She doesn't trust Maasai anymore. And all the time when you see her, she's nervous.
In the months that followed, Odile was implicated in the deaths of several Maasai cows.
So that's made us start thinking, is there some kind of connection between what the Maasai are doing to the elephants and the elephants' ability to understand that and to have a sort of payback?
The actions suggested that elephants could remember an emotional event from their past and then act upon it. For Sayalel, it is simply common sense.
I use the word revenge because, like you did this to me or you killed my calf, so I'm going to do this, I'm going to kill a cow.
The cow certainly made an easier target for the elephant's aggression.
They may feel that it's safer to pick on a cow that can't fight back, but at the same time still getting back at the Maasai. I don't know, are they that clever? I think they are.
Recent research into their cognitive capacities suggests that Poole is correct. Felicity de Zulueta is a consultant psychiatrist and the head of the Traumatic Stress Service at London's Maudsley Hospital. She believes that there are similarities between the minds of humans and the minds of elephants.
We share the same attachment system. We need these attachments to grow up, and we feel the loss of them, and we show the signs of grief. These are all attachment symptoms and signs. And why shouldn't elephants?
Soila Sayalel has seen indications of this sense of grief and loss. Elephants will literally stop in their tracks and acknowledge the bones of the dead.
It's one of the way that they mourn for the dead. And that's why they just go and touch the bones, trying to remember that one of us died here.
Certainly, this is not idle curiosity. Elephants will return to skeletons repeatedly, touching them with their trunks time and time again.
They seem to have some sort of understanding of death. They definitely distinguish between the bones of their own kind and the bones of others. They seem to have some rituals over death.
These rituals are very similar to the behaviors performed over the body of Eli Asaf in Uganda's Queen Elizabeth National Park.
When an elephant kills something, especially a person, they stand over the dead body. They cover it with dust, and they refuse to be moved.
They have fantastic memories. Those are all attachment signs.
Young elephants are reared in a close matriarchal society, with many complex layers of extended family. But this complexity is both a strength and a weakness.
Elephants are highly emotional, they're highly social, they're highly intelligent, they have this very complex network of relationships. And if you start to tamper with that, through culling, through poaching, through capturing babies, you start breaking down the fabric of that society.
And when that society breaks down, elephant behavior changes.
You can see these animals are on the alert. They have problems interacting. They're very aggressive, very out of control behaviors, which they just express as best they can.
Eve Abbey believes this violence is a direct result of trauma.
Trauma turns elephants into being aggressive or being very violent. These are traumatized elephants. They don't know anything better. They block roads. They go out into villages, trample. All the elephants have just gone wild.
To psychiatrist Felicity DeZulueta, the symptoms sound very similar to a condition in humans called post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD.
PTSD is the reliving of a past event. In other words, it means that somewhere in your mind you have remembered that past event, you've put it to the back of your mind, or in a cupboard in your mind, as I say, and then, to your horror, it comes back.
Since 1980, post-traumatic stress has been officially recognized as a medical disorder in humans.
And now we are finding, surprise, surprise, that animals have the same symptoms as we do.
To suggest that elephants might be suffering in a similar way that we do, it didn't seem to me to be such a great leap.
These baby elephants wake up just like all my patients with nightmares at night. And this is one of the cardinal symptoms of PTSD, is nightmares at night.
But what could have affected these elephants so profoundly? The aftermath of trauma on both humans and elephants were disturbingly familiar to biologist Eve Abbey. Her family were living in northern Uganda when Idi Amin came to power. Amin started an ethnic purge, beginning with Abbey's tribe, the Acholi, who had supported his political opponents. He began by executing the elders.
During Amin's time, the males were selectively taken out. Can you imagine a whole family, a certain age group, of elders being wiped out. My dad's generation.
Their children were left to fend for themselves.
They form these roaming, violent, destructive bands. They are aggressive. And this is what trauma does. If you look at the adult male population, it's not there to teach these children how to behave. The way elephants live is the way humans live. Their characters and behavior mirrors that of human beings.
That survived demonstration are now fully grown. Elephants of Katwe. There was no rational reason why the elephants attacked Eli Asaf, but their irrationality might have been triggered by stress. Traumatized individuals were known to have an exaggerated startle response. Yet their reaction over Eli's dead body appeared to be one of regret, almost as if they knew they had done something wrong. The elephant populations of Queen Elizabeth National Park and Amboseli had both suffered a violent past. In Uganda, the atrocities of Idi Amin decimated the elephant population. In Amboseli, the Maasai protests over land rights began a cycle of violence. But what of the South African elephants who were attacking rhinos? It seems Pilanesberg too has a disturbing story to tell. Just a 2-hour drive northwest of Johannesburg. The intention was to stock it with wild animals from all over South Africa. It was called Operation Genesis.
It was a radical idea at the time to develop a wildlife reserve and bring back all the animals that were missing, and then use those animals in a very positive way to develop the reserve and at the same time contribute to conservation.
Part of the plan was to relocate a number of elephants from Kruger National Park, following a planned population cull. But unfortunately, they were unable to move whole families.
At the time, the technology and the experience that existed didn't allow for the movement of large elephants.
So they didn't move the adults. They moved the babies.
So young elephants, elephants that are at the height of a man, could easily be caught and loaded up and moved en masse into the Pilanesberg and released into this area which hadn't seen elephants for perhaps 100 years.
The older elephants were darted with a paralyzing drug, then shot and butchered for their meat.
They butchered the mothers while the babies watched. And then tied them to dead mothers.
Tying the infants to the heavy corpses of their mothers prevented them from getting away. At the time, no one imagined that this might be making a deep impression on the orphaned witnesses.
I'm sure at the time this seemed like a perfectly natural and normal thing to do.
South Africa in the 1970s, controlled kills were seen as a normal conservation technique.
These live babies were then shipped off and left to fend for themselves.
The animals were driven over 300 miles, then released into a strange and unfamiliar habitat.
So they were all moved without any role models, without any adults, and basically just dumped in this national park. So these animals that are highly social and highly emotional have had quite a rough start in life, and we begin to see some of the consequences as they grow up.
For 13 peaceful years, the translocation appeared to have been successful. Then, the rhino killing began. Joyce Poole believes that the traumatic experiences had taken their toll.
These kind of events, I'm sure, are etched in their brains and have long-term impact on them.
The killing was done with the best of intentions. At the time, it was believed that actively controlling the size of the population was good for preserving the balance of the park. But the Zulueta believes that long-standing damage might have been done.
Traumatization is transmitted down generations unless somebody stops it, which is why you have actually traumatized societies where huge levels of violence exist amongst themselves as well as towards others.
Van Dyke was just pleased they got to the bottom of it.
To have an example so clearly illustrate what happens when these structures break down was just incredible. And to have the opportunity to be able to correct that and actually see that population recover was just an enormous privilege.
Gus Van Dyke was privileged enough to have the opportunity to repair some of the damage.
So I suggested what they do is to bring in some older males from Kruger.
Van Dyke had come to the same conclusion. By now, they had the technology to move big elephants, so they could bring in the adult bulls they needed. Although this treatment still looks rough, the elephant is suffering no real physical damage. And the ploy was immediately successful.
And it did stop the males coming into must and may have also provided a sort of role model for these, if you want to call them hooligans.
It was very obvious that must patterns changed immediately. In fact, from the day that the big bull elephants were reintroduced, not a single rhino was killed by an elephant thereafter.
The abnormal behaviors seem to have developed because humans had disrupted the elephant's social structures.
We have, as wildlife managers, been really messing about with elephants.
Dr. Poole believes the events have caused deep emotional repercussions.
Their suffering of post-traumatic stress disorder is probably something that has gone on for as long as elephants and people have been interacting.
It seems the motive for their violence lies with us.
Spring, in the backcountry surrounding Yellowstone National Park, a lone visitor made a gruesome discovery. A severed head, coarsely hacked off at the neck. Spread out over the forest floor, the victim's other extremities, but the bulk of the body gone. What makes this macabre scene doubly bizarre is that the remains don't belong to a human victim, but to one of North America's largest and most powerful predators, a fully grown black bear. This was not the only death. 3 others follow, all connected, all pointing to a larger mystery, one that will change the way we look at these animals forever. Yellowstone is one of the largest national parks in the United States. It's a mountain fortress, a craggy wilderness, based around a huge dormant volcano 30 miles wide and 45 miles long. It's part of a larger area called the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, one of the last truly wild places left in the US. Every year, millions of tourists experience this spectacular scenery. Yet there are places here where humans rarely set foot. The forces remain powerful and primal. It was here that biologist Dr. David Mattson unearthed remains that shed new light on the behavior of bears in Yellowstone. Mattson was studying grizzly bears, investigating some unusual activity in a place called Hoodoo Creek.
Hoodoo Creek is a narrow, steep drainage that's very difficult to get around in.
A steep-sided forest, rapidly narrowing as it descended. It's a place that immediately made Mattson nervous.
It's the kind of place that just intrinsically leaves you feeling ill at ease because there's not much of an easy way to get out once you get in.
Mattson knew that Hoodoo Creek was rife with bear activity, and bears are David Mattson's business. As soon as he reached the bottom of the valley, he knew that something was wrong.
There was the stench of death. An incredibly distinctive kind of odor, almost a palpable, thick odor.
Mattson tracked the smell to its source. And that's when he saw it. Lying on the forest floor was a severed paw. It had been sheared off just above the wrist. From the size, Mattson could tell it came from a large bear. The short claws give it away as a black bear. But where was the rest of it? No other remains were visible. Mattson has spent most of his working life studying bears. In spite of the dangers, he pressed on. "1,000 feet away, deeper into the valley, he made another strange discovery.
There was a severed black bear's head.
The body was nowhere to be seen. The bear's head was perched on a pile of debris, surrounded by sticks and dirt, almost like a display.
One of the most macabre things I've ever seen.
The removal of the head and paws are the sort of thing a big game hunter might do. But what sort of hunter would leave the most obvious trophies and make off with the body? There's only one logical answer. A hunter that wanted to eat it. The death at Hoodoo Creek in 1990 was the first of its kind ever recorded in Yellowstone. But it wasn't the last. "40 miles across the park, a group of tourists report seeing what looks like a dead bear at Grizzly Overlook. Biologist Kerry Gunther is sent in to investigate.
On the morning of August 2nd, I got a call from the Canyon Visitor Center, and they had some park visitors there that were looking for grizzly bears out in Hayden Valley. And at one pullout we call Grizzly Overlook, they noticed a black bear laying in the sagebrush. It was obviously dead.
Unlike the first corpse, this time much of the body was intact, but there's a grotesque twist. The bear's penis had been removed. It was left lying next to the corpse. There were teeth marks at the base. It had been bitten off. Gunther knew that this victim needed to be sent to a specialist. "100 miles away in Bozeman, Montana, the Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks run a pathology lab. Here they're equipped to deal with any mysterious deaths found in the Yellowstone area.
Ready?
Yep.
They intended to study the carcass more thoroughly, to discover not only how it was killed, but why. Nearly 200 pounds of dead bear and a whole load of questions. The man called upon to carry out the examination was biologist Neil Anderson.
Normally when we receive an animal, we try to distance ourselves from what was reported to us prior to getting the bear.
195.5 pounds.
Anderson and his team take nothing for granted.
We base our conclusions solely on the evidence that we observe while we're doing the examination. Width of the back foot, 4 3/4.
The measurements confirmed that this was an adult male,
61 inches.
measuring 5 feet from head to tail, and the victim of a powerful and violent attack.
Seems to be a lot of trauma to the head. Several possible puncture wounds.
Just as Gunther had described, the carcass had been partly consumed.
Appears to be some tissue removed from the hindquarters.
And the genitals bitten off. Strangely, it was this grotesque element that will be the biggest clue to the identity of the killer. Two black bears killed in Greater Yellowstone, both in very unusual circumstances. The team investigating the Grizzly Overlook case began a thorough inquiry. Leader of the bear study team is Dr. Charles Schwartz.
When we come across a kill like this, or when we come across a dead bear, to a large degree we're doing investigations. We're trying to take all of the evidence that we can find to try to come to some conclusion of what might have happened to this bear.
With a team of only 24 scientists, covering such a huge and hostile area of land is no easy task. Situated in the northern Rockies, in the heart of the American West, the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem is 18 million acres of true wilderness, about the size of West Virginia. Made up of mountains, Meadows, forests, rivers and plains. It's the only place in the US where all of North America's large predators can still be found. Could one of them have killed the black bears at Hoodoo Creek and Grizzly Overlook? Solitary cougars prowl the mountains. Packs of wolves roam the plains. Coyotes stalk the meadows. Ferocious wolverines lurk and scavenge everywhere. All of these predators coexist alongside the bears. But which is powerful enough to take down and kill a 200-pound predator?
It's probably very rare that the event would have taken place by a cougar. Cougars tend not to be predators of other large carnivores.
A wolverine, although incredibly aggressive, is no match for a black bear up to 10 times its size. There are packs of coyotes in the area, but the signs on the corpse did not match those of a coyote attack. But what about wolves working in a pack? Wolves have been known to attack bears, charging in, biting at the bear's sides and hindquarters. But they tend to pick on smaller individuals. And as far as the researchers could tell, the nearest wolves were miles away from Grizzly Overlook.
I didn't think wolves had killed this black bear. Wolves had only recently been reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park, and they hadn't recolonized Hayden Valley. We didn't have any known wolf pack living in Hayden Valley.
That left only one creature capable of inflicting these injuries on an animal this big and this strong. Another bear.
It's very possible that it could have been another black bear. I mean, in the bear world, big bears kill and eat little bears.
Although very rare, there are a few reports of cannibalism by bears in Yellowstone, dating back to the 1930s. Could the bear at Grizzly Overlook have been the victim of an attack by another black bear? Black bears are very adaptable animals that prefer to live in and around the forests. They're formidable predators, capable of inflicting severe injury by one blow of their powerful paws or a bite from their well-armed jaws. They measure nearly 3 feet at the shoulder and 6 feet when standing. They weigh up to 500 pounds. The removal of the penis from the Grizzly Overlook bear is the big clue. When large males fight, they often attack this area of the body. Whether this is to prevent their opponents breeding or just to hit them where it hurts is unknown. But Greater Yellowstone has 2 types of bear. The victims at Grizzly Overlook and Hoodoo Creek were both black bears. But Yellowstone is also home to the scarcer grizzly bear. Grizzlies are amazingly powerful carnivores. They have bone-crushing jaws and 4-inch claws used when attacking and holding down prey. They have a distinct shoulder hump due to the large muscles needed for digging up roots and turning over boulders. A fully grown grizzly can reach up to 8 feet when standing. It's one of the largest land predators in the world, twice the weight of a black bear. It's the top predator in Yellowstone. Investigators in the Grizzly Overlook case were down to a short list of 2 suspects. But which one did it?
We started looking for evidence that might point us in a direction or give us some clues anyway as to whether it was another black bear or a grizzly. And we started skinning it.
The skin of a bear is up to 5 millimeters thick, and the addition of fur made accurate analysis of the wounds very difficult. To examine it properly, laboratory supervisor Neil Anderson carried out a necropsy, an animal autopsy.
Basically, if you look at tissue in a live animal, if it's traumatized in any way, there's a rush of blood to that tissue, which causes bruising or a hematoma.
And this animal had certainly been traumatized.
And the skull of the bear had multiple bite wounds and was crushed. There was actually chips of bones that you could feel and wiggle.
The evidence in the lab backed up Gunther's observations.
A lot of tissue damage here.
Bite wounds had penetrated the skull and shattered the cheekbone. Bone fragments were missing. Observed around the head, throat, and abdominal areas were multiple puncture wounds.
Associated with the punctures were hematomas or bruising. That, to us, indicated that the punctures occurred while the animal was alive.
The bruises showed that blood was still flowing around the victim's body when the wounds were inflicted, proving they were made by the killer, not by an animal scavenging on the dead body. But there are so many puncture wounds, it made it difficult to see which bite was which.
I'd say that those are probably from upper canines.
Then Anderson got a lucky break.
There's a couple puncture wounds here that look like they could be set from a single bite.
He found 2 distinct puncture marks on the right side of the face, just under the lower jawbone. Wounds that had been invisible before he'd removed the hide.
Based on the damage here, I'd say that's probably the killing blow.
A matching pair of canines. Measuring the distance between these 2 holes might just identify whose teeth had done the biting.
59 millimeters.
Anderson had the measurement he was after. The holes are 2.5 inches apart. Now it was only a matter of finding the teeth that matched the spacing.
We have reference skulls in our lab, and we measured a large number of different skulls: black bears, wolves, grizzly bears, mountain lions, and really the only animal that had that distance between the lower canines was a grizzly bear.
It seemed that the team had overwhelming evidence that their killer was the grizzly. The removal of the penis, the shattered skull, canine puncture marks, and the bruising under the skin all added up to one conclusion.
If you look at the preponderance of evidence, it leads us to conclude that he had been killed and eaten by a grizzly bear.
But this didn't solve the mystery. In 60 years of research, there had never been a documented case of grizzly on black bear aggression in Yellowstone. And yet there had been another unusual death, the one at Hoodoo Creek. Was that also the result of a grizzly attack? Ahead lay seasons of uncertainty. The black bear killing at Hoodoo Creek seemed very different to the one at Grizzly Overlook. But could a grizzly be responsible for that death too? Biologist Dr. David Matson certainly thought so.
The size of the tracks nailed it as an adult male grizzly bear because no other bear has a track that large. And so this black bear had been at least fed on by the grizzly bear and probably killed.
The good tracking conditions meant Matson could piece together the circumstances surrounding the death.
The soil was really loose, and so we were able to then backtrack and reconstruct what had actually happened. And in fact, determine that the grizzly bear had killed the black bear and just exactly how he had done it as well.
The grizzly was moving along the valley bottom, hidden from the black bear grazing higher up.
I would guess as soon as it saw the black bear, it lunged forward instinctively.
It's likely that as soon as the male grizzly attacked, the black bear dived off and attempted to make her escape. She got about 100 yards, then leapt up a fire-blackened pine tree.
And apparently she didn't get very far because what we saw were the rakes of her claws as she was drug off the tree by the grizzly bear.
She escaped again. 15 yards later, she jumped up another pine, only to be dragged off once more.
And then just 10 yards below that, we could see where they had tumbled on down and the grizzly bear had killed her.
Two black bears, killed by two different grizzlies. What was the motive? When any animal enters the realm of a predator, it must know how it's going to escape. For black bears, the best way is to climb the nearest tree. But the black bear at Grizzly Overlook had ventured too far from the forest and left itself no chance of reaching safety.
In an effort to try to escape from the grizzly bear, the black bear basically had three options. It could have tried to swim the river for 68 meters, run 4 meters on land to one of those small dead snags on that little island, and tried to climb a tree to get away from the grizzly bear. The second option would have been to swim across the entire river and then run 11 meters on land to the small stand of living trees. And the third option for the black bear would have been to run across this meadow, through the sagebrush, up that hill to that contiguous stand of forest that's approximately 900 meters away. But the black bear didn't get away.
He was hit, killed before he had a chance to choose any of those options. Both bear species have a top speed of over 30 miles per hour, faster than many horses. But with the grizzly already up to speed and bearing down on it, the black bear stood no chance. It was a fatal mistake. He'd left the safety of the forest and entered the domain of the grizzly. Investigators had the first concrete evidence of grizzly on black bear aggression in Greater Yellowstone. But if the two species were aggressive towards each other, then how had they managed to coexist in Yellowstone? The answer seemed to be that they use their environment in very different ways.
The behavioral tendencies of black bears and grizzly bears are quite different. And it has a lot to do with the kind of world they evolved in. Black bears evolved in North America, south of the ice sheets during the Ice Age, whereas grizzly bears are essentially a species of Europe and Asia. They evolved primarily on the Siberian plains.
Grizzly bears evolved on the tundra. Black bears evolved in the forest. And it wasn't until about 11,000 years ago, when the ice sheets receded, that black bears moved north and grizzly bears moved south, and then the two species coexisted together.
In Yellowstone, the two species of bears generally stick to the habitats they're used to.
Grizzly bears tend to use open environments, meadows, willow bottoms near rivers. Black bears, on the other hand, tend to confine themselves to the more forested habitats.
So what was it that was bringing them together? The grizzly bear study team has spent the last 25 years capturing bears, fitting them with collars and monitoring them. These collars are equipped with GPS devices, which use satellites to track the bear's every move. But in such mountainous terrain, it's very difficult to receive the radio signals emitted by the collars. The team has to take to the air.
Once a week, we can go out in an airplane, and the collar then will turn on and transmit the information to our computer.
Shannon Pedrusny is one of a team of ecologists tracking Yellowstone's collared bears. She's patrolled these 300,000 acres of wilderness for 10 years.
The study that we're doing is to look at the differences in habitat use between black and grizzly bears.
Until collaring work began, the team knew little of how the bears coexisted in Yellowstone.
We have members of both species radio collared, and I fly every week and upload the data.
The GPS data she uploads tells Pedrousny where the bears have been, at what time, and whether they've come into contact with other bears. But one routine flight led to something else entirely. The attacks at Hoodoo Creek and Grizzly Overlook occurred when black bears strayed out of their territory and into the path of a grizzly. They were just simple opportunism. This one would be very different. Somewhere in this vast expanse, one of the collared black bears had stopped moving.
Her collar was on mortality signal, and the uploaded data indicated that she had not moved in several days.
The only time a bear stays still for that long is during winter hibernation. But this was autumn, when bears are at their most active. Something was very wrong.
The activity sensor in the collar registered 0.
But there was nothing Pedrousny could do from the air. Someone would have to go in on foot. The man chosen to investigate was wildlife technician Craig Whitman. Whitman knew this bear already. In fact, he'd collared her just 2 weeks earlier. Black bear 22048, a female, between 20 and 22 years old.
She weighed 178 pounds, which is a really good body weight, and was in good health at capture. She had good body fat. She was still agile.
When he left her, she'd been fit and well, but now she'd stopped moving. The coordinates he'd been given, a location near Dave Adams Hill, was quite a distance from where he'd last seen her. She'd obviously been moving higher up into the forest in search of food to fatten up for the winter. But this was her last journey.
So the scene we came upon, there was a large intestine and the stomach buried in that pile.
The body parts were strewn throughout the forest.
So, you know, we find her intestine, her stomach.
Whitman had been with this female just 2 weeks ago, and now bits of her body were scattered amongst the trees. He knew he had to find and catalogue all that remained.
We got basically almost the whole hide and the whole skeleton.
Actual photos from the scene of the kill showed the skull, the limbs, and the spine spread out over 3 different locations.
The hide was inverted out over the head, right out over the skull. Actually, ears were pulled through and inverted.
Although the skin was still attached, it had been pulled inside out.
Her legs were disarticulated from the spine, but they were still attached to the hide, so the hide was inverted down over to the wrist, just kind of like you take a sweater off.
Whitman saw all the signs of a grizzly attack, but it was right in the heart of black bear territory. This could only mean that the grizzlies were using the same part of the forest.
We had really good bite marks on the neck, on the face.
These shots show the inverted skin of the head and the canine puncture marks.
And we were able to find grizzly bear hairs where the bear had brushed hairs off on sticks.
The inverted hide, the bite marks, and the grizzly hair left at the scene led to only one conclusion. A third grizzly bear attack. And this one offered much clearer evidence of what had happened after the kill. The black bear had been skinned, dismembered, and scattered. Why? Although their diet consists of up to 80% meat, the grizzlies in Yellowstone are actually omnivores. The rest of their diet is vegetation.
If you look at a bear's teeth, they're very similar to a human's, at least as far as the molars are concerned. They're fairly flat, they have cusps to them, and they're not designed to cut flesh. They're designed to grind and to crush.
That leaves the grizzlies with a problem if they want to get to the meat of their prey.
Generally, what you'll find is that they have a tendency to peel the hide off. I guess the best analogy would be somewhat similar to peeling a banana.
The hide of the black bear at Dave Adams Hill had been peeled back so the grizzly could get to the meat. When a grizzly makes a kill, it eats as much as it can, consuming up to a quarter of its own body weight in one go. But a black bear is half the weight of a grizzly, twice as much as it can manage. So the grizzly has learned to hide the remainder somewhere safe. It scratches a shallow trench in the earth and covers the remains with sticks and dirt. This behavior is known as caching. Partly buried, the meat is kept free of flies and away from scavengers who might steal the bear's spoils. Until it regains its appetite, the bear guards the cache protectively, even dragging the carcass from one cache site to another and reburying it to make sure it stays safe.
When the bears cache a carcass like that, they'll go out 2 or 3 meters out and they'll dig the dirt and vegetation, pine needles in, and bring it all into a big pile.
That's exactly what happened to black bear 22048.
She had been cached twice by another bear and then drug off another 10 or 15 feet, and the carcass had been dispersed.
At Hoodoo Creek, Matson too discovered buried remains. But why hadn't caching occurred in the Grizzly Overlook case?
It was only a couple hundred meters from the road, and so when traffic came along in the morning, I believe that probably scared the grizzly bear off, and that's why it only scavenged 1/4 of the black bear.
Three black bears killed, all by grizzly bears. Researchers now had concrete evidence that grizzlies in Yellowstone were attacking black bears. And they knew what occurred once the kills had been made. But an important mystery remained. It was one thing for grizzlies to attack and kill when they happened upon a black bear, but the third kill at Dave Adams Hill occurred deep within black bear territory. What was the grizzly doing there? The scientists compared the cases once again. The corpse at Hoodoo Creek was found in the spring. The body at Grizzly Overlook during the height of summer. But the carcass at Dave Adams Hill was discovered with autumn looming, when bears are hastily trying to find as much fattening food as possible before 6 months starvation during hibernation.
Basically, the bear is faced with not only getting enough food to survive from day to day, it's got to get a lot of extra food to convert to fat to carry it for that 5 to 7 month period when it's not eating anything. And so in the fall, bears enter into a period that scientists call a hyperphagic period. Hyperphagic means excessive eating. And so the bear spends most of its active period in the fall searching for and consuming foods.
So did the grizzly at Dave Adams Hill go into the forest to hunt down and kill a black bear in order to fatten up on meat?
Meat is a much higher quality food, and when bears can get it, they'll choose meat over vegetation in most cases.
However, there was another possible reason why the grizzly had entered the forest. Examining the stomach contents of the black bear, the researchers discovered it had been voraciously feeding on white bark pine cones.
You know, in the fall, bears are just looking to put on weight, and they're looking for the highest calorie diet that they can get to put weight on to carry them through the winter. In this case, she was feeding on white bark pine seeds, which are mostly fat.
Scientists were finding that this energy-rich food source is a potentially crucial part of both black and grizzly bears' diets. And it seemed that's what the black bear at Dave Adams Hill had been doing when she was killed.
She had about half a gallon of these seeds in her stomach.
And these seeds were the reason grizzlies were in black bear territory. The most likely scenario is that the grizzly went into the forest to search for white bark pine cones, came across black bear 22048, killed her and ate her. This discovery revealed how important the forests are, not only to the black bears, but also to the grizzlies, normally associated with the open plains. Maybe there was more habitat overlap than was originally thought.
Even though black bears and grizzly bears evolved in different environments, it turns out that we see black bears eating a lot of the same foods that grizzly bears do. It begs the question of how the black bears then manage to live in the same environment that the grizzly bears live in. And I think for the most part, black bears do that by figuring out how to avoid grizzly bears, having some sense of where and when they will likely find grizzly bears and not being there.
Both species will go where there are common food sources, but they avoid each other by being there at different times. If they get it wrong, the outcome can be fatal. In the case of Hoodoo Creek, the black bear hadn't worked out where and when the grizzly would be there. This was because the environment had recently changed. The forest had been blackened by fires 2 years earlier, but its regeneration had led to an unexpected profusion of highly nutritious food, sought after by both species of bear.
Hoodoo Creek had been burned by the fires of 1988, which went through quick and hot, but left most of the trees standing and blackened. The U.S. Forest Service had gone in and aerially seeded the drainage with clover and grasses.
It had been converted from a relatively poor foraging environment for bears to a particularly rich one.
So there were bears there in great numbers focused on grazing clover. Having not yet figured out all of the dynamics of who was where when, which I think also then contributed to the vulnerability of that black bear and why she got caught where she did.
Although the three cases had seemed very different, they're actually all about habitat. The death at Hoodoo Creek occurred because both black bears and grizzlies were discovering a new feeding environment. At Grizzly Overlook, the black bear strayed straight into the grizzlies' territory. At Dave Adams Hill, both species of bear were searching for a common food source deep in the heart of the forest. But the fourth death changed everything. Winter in Yellowstone. Sub-zero temperatures are common. Both grizzly bears and black bears were in hibernation. Curled up in burrows or shelters, they might be buried by tens of feet of snow. But on the very first telemetry flight of the following year, the very first day of tracking for the new season, there was cause for concern. Shannon Pedrusny picked up the telltale sound of a bear mortality signal. It was coming from black bear 22049, a female, aged 8 years. She'd been collared less than a year before. The coordinates pointed to a place called Pilgrim Creek, just 12 miles from the previous death at Dave Adams Hill. This time, Pedrusny decided to go in and see for herself. The mortality signal triggers when a bear is stationary for 4 hours or more.
The fact that all of the recorded locations for that collar were at the den suggested that that bear never left that site.
As Pedrusny neared the site, there was still no movement. The bear position remained stationary, just where she had last been recorded at the end of the previous autumn. Upon reaching the site, Pedrusny found the collar, lying on top of a pile of debris. Everywhere she looked, she could see the signs of a struggle.
Near the collar were 2 limbs. The hide was pulled down around the paws.
These 2 legs had been dismembered, skinned, and the flesh eaten, just like at Dave Adams Hill.
All of the long bones of the legs were exposed, and there were large chunks of hide and lots of hair. And then a little bit farther away, maybe 10 meters away, we found the other 2 limbs lying there.
Actual photos from the scene show the legs surrounded by fur that had been ripped from the carcass. But if this was where Black Bear 22049 had bedded down for the winter, where was the den?
The area was very torn up, typical of a bear feeding on a carcass. Parts of the carcass were probably cached. The den location may have been covered up or obliterated by the caching behavior and the large pile of debris that had accumulated.
It appeared that the den had been destroyed during the struggle. But if this bear hadn't moved all winter, how could they tell if it had been killed at the end of autumn and preserved by the snow, or if it had been killed at the beginning of the spring? The conclusive evidence came when they found the paws.
When we pulled the hide back to look at them, they were still sloughing the outer layer of skin.
At the end of 6 months in the den, bears slough off the dead skin that is developed on their paws during hibernation.
The old skin just dies off and peels off, and it exposes new, fresh skin.
This paw had those dry patches, and the fact that dead skin was still evident meant that the bear had never emerged from the den.
Her paws still had that old layer clinging to them, but it was coming off. So we'd assumed that she was still in the den at the time she died.
Without a doubt, Black Bear 22049 had been killed very recently. She probably hadn't made it out of the den.
Most likely, something had come along and killed her in the den.
If the black bear was still in her den, then this was no chance encounter. In spring, male grizzlies emerge from hibernation first. After fasting for 6 months, they're desperate for food. The grizzly had entered the black bear's territory. Then, using its keen senses, detected the presence of the black bear at her den site, attacked and killed her. The fight between these two massive predators would have been fast and ferocious. Only one would walk away. A piece of evidence left after the battle confirmed the severity. It would also lead to the perpetrator.
While we were looking around the site, we found a claw, a broken off claw from a grizzly bear lying on a log in the middle of the scene. It looked like evidence of a struggle.
That claw pretty much told us that, in fact, there probably had to be a fight.
Now, for the first time, the team had physical evidence to link them directly to the attacker.
Maybe we would catch a bear that was missing a claw, the incriminating evidence that that was the culprit that had killed our black bear.
As research continued, the team trapped and collared more grizzly bears near Pilgrim Creek. It was then that Pedrusny's team made an unexpected breakthrough.
Craig Whitman caught grizzly bear 398, and he was missing the middle claw on his right front paw.
The scientists now had a killer, grizzly bear 398. But they would never know if this grizzly was responsible for the previous death just 12 miles away. After collaring, 398 was returned to Yellowstone. Monitoring revealed that he did not kill again. The first discovery of an attack by a grizzly on a black bear in Yellowstone confirmed that predation did occur. Now, after 3 more documented deaths, the scientists had proved predation is part of coexistence. With only 24 scientists covering 18 million acres, there could be many more attacks that no one knows about. But the black bear population in Yellowstone remains relatively secure. There are more than 5 times as many black bears here as there are grizzlies. In fact, the larger, stronger, and more aggressive grizzly is the Yellowstone resident under threat.
The main reason why bears die in this part of the world, and most parts of the world, is because a human kills it.
When bears have to leave the high elevation habitats and they try to come down to lower elevations to seek alternative foods, that brings them directly into contact with people. And that's when we see conflicts.
We've documented that between 80 and 90% of all grizzly bear deaths are caused by humans, and that's despite the fact they're protected under the Endangered Species Act.
Yellowstone is not just a park, it's an untamed wilderness in the heart of America. Over the past 60 years, the bears of Yellowstone have become the most studied bears in the world. Events like those at Grizzly Overlook and Hoodoo Creek have given us a much clearer idea of what goes on here. But it's the advances brought by telemetry tracking that mean we now know what the bears are doing, when and where.
The mistake this black bear made was venturing out into a large, non-forested area inhabited by a high density of grizzly bears.
Attacks like these have probably always happened. But by tracking the bears, we now have a greater insight into how they use this habitat.
They overlap to an enormous degree. Mostly the difference in their distribution is in time. In an individual place, the bears seem to know how to avoid each other in most cases.
There is scientific proof that these species do attack each other, and a better understanding of why.
I would guess that in almost all cases, when a grizzly bear kills a black bear, it is for food.
No 2 bears are alike. They have different personalities, I think, much like people have different personalities. I've known some bears that I would consider to be well-adjusted, and other bears that I think it would be fair to say were neurotic, and some bears that probably could be called psychotic. And I can easily imagine one bear more likely being a killer of bears than another.
The 4 black bear deaths have led Yellowstone's scientific community to reconsider how 2 of their top predators share the backcountry. But there is still far more going on in the wilds of Yellowstone than we will ever know.
calm masks a sinister threat.
There was things going on we weren't sure of.
Every town has its secrets. Some have their nightmares.
You would just see them floating.
And they said only a few hundred died, and I think it was more like in the thousands.
Something strange is turning this once peaceful wilderness into the stuff of horror films, changing the lake's residents into empty, mindless shells, incapable of controlling their own bodies. In other words, zombies. At first, it just seems like an ordinary death. A chance discovery amongst the tangled weeds. A bloated body, floating belly up, exposed to the elements. There is very little to alert suspicions. Until a second corpse is found. And then a third. Their putrefying bodies fringing the lake, washed to the side like unwanted debris.
There was times I would go out on the lake and be able to find 10 alligators in a half a mile. And these were adult, large alligators. They, weren't little juveniles. They were 10, 12, 14 foot long, huge alligators dead, floating around on the lake.
Something is badly wrong at Lake Griffin. The reports grabbed the attention of Florida Fish and Wildlife. Alan Woodward is assigned to get down to the lake and check it out for himself. He already has his suspicions.
Gunshot wounds to the head is the most common thing you would see. Also, we looked for tails missing in case people were poaching alligators for the tail meat. The other thing that could happen is people hitting alligators with boats. You can usually see propeller scars on the back.
But the corpses tell a different story.
No signs of trauma, propeller scars, no scars, fairly intact.
None of these things were observed on any of the dead alligators.
But all is not what it seems. Not all of the gators are dead. Lake Griffin lies in the very heart of Florida, about 50 miles northwest of Orlando. It is home to one of the largest alligator populations in the state. It's the only one of Florida's 8,000 lakes to show the bizarre spate of deaths. Rotting, bloated corpses are turning up along the shoreline. Trapped in the reeds and out in the open water, amongst the floating vegetation. So a select team of investigators from 13 agencies is assembled. Elledge of the Water Management District, pathologist Scott Terrell, and Dale Honeyfield from the Northern Appalachian Research Laboratory in Pennsylvania. It's their job to track down the killer.
It's a team effort, it really is. No one person's more important than the other because we've got to put all this information together to try and rule out things that it is not and rule in things that it could be.
They begin their investigation by observing the alligators' behavior for themselves.
We noticed alligators that showed poor equilibrium. In other words, they had a hard time righting themselves in the water. They listed to one side or another. Some of them had trouble keeping their heads above water. There was some speculation that they were eventually drowning because they could not keep their heads above water.
The scientists are mystified. What could cause this amphibious creature to drown? Alligators spend their lives in and around water. It's their lifeblood. They die without it. They use it as a sanctuary, to keep cool, to mate, to hunt. They can remain submerged for 2 hours. But the zombie gators are struggling to even swim. They float listlessly in the water or lie motionless on the bank.
The first thing you notice is that they were unresponsive. Often, you thought the alligator was dead on the shoreline.
Only sporadic twitches give away that they're still alive. Alligator behavior like this has never been seen before. This top predator is no longer able to move, let alone kill.
It was a strange... They looked like they were drugged almost.
It's strange.
There are no external signs of injury, no obvious clues. So a team of pathologists go to work on the bodies.
At the beginning, in any case like this where we don't know what's going on, we start with a complete examination. We leave no stone unturned. So really, we're examining this animal from snout to tail.
The dissection is done systematically.
Starting with the skin, we move internally into the internal organs of the animal. We're taking pieces and parts of everything that animal can give us.
By examining the inside of the animal, Dr. Scott Terrell hopes to find a clue as to the cause of death. But Terrell isn't sure exactly what he's looking for.
We're taking diagnostic samples from heart, lung, liver, kidney, intestinal contents. We're dividing those tissues up into a variety of different containers so that we can test them for viruses, bacteria, toxins, pesticides. And from there, we can try to make a diagnosis.
Terrell examines the corpses meticulously. But in every animal, the organs appear to be healthy. Despite his best efforts, there is still no obvious indication why these animals have died.
What we were seeing were adult, healthy animals with not much, we couldn't see much when we were doing a postmortem exam. A lot of the initial tests were coming back negative. We weren't finding consistent bacterial infections. We didn't find any evidence of a virus. We weren't finding much.
Sure enough, none of the tests are positive. None of the organs seem diseased. The immune system is uncompromised. And Terrell finds no signs of trauma or foreign bodies. The corpses are telling them nothing. The investigators can see only one other course of action. They must get an affected animal before it dies. They're going to have to go hunting for zombies. The operation has to be carried out in the dead of night. Nighttime is when alligators are most active. Easier to find because of their eye reflections, and least wary of an approaching boat. The investigators head out to catch one of the zombies. The harpoon is designed to lodge humanely underneath the alligator's armor-plated skin, allowing the hunters to reel the animal in. first they have to find one. Alligators are stealth hunters, lying motionless and often submerged, making the task doubly difficult. Then, they see one. They have to make this shot count. A healthy alligator would normally thrash around at this point. After all, it's just had a 2-inch barb stabbed into his back. But this animal hardly seems to notice. Things are getting stranger and stranger.
They showed very lethargic behavior. They didn't try and avoid the boat as we approached them, which is very unusual for wild alligators, particularly on Lake Griffin, and they put up very little fight.
But still the team take no chances. They secure the alligator's jaws before bringing it on board. After all, this is a zombie alligator, and no one can tell just what it will do next. The investigators follow protocol. They place tape over the eyes and jaws to keep the alligator subdued. Because what they have to do next is really tricky. They're going to attempt to take a blood sample from deep behind the alligator's head, past the vertebrae, and through an inch of muscle and tough skin. The blood here, in the cervical sinus of the spinal vein, is in much greater quantity. The corpses have told them nothing, but the blood sample of a live animal may give clues to their unusual behavior. These precious 20 milliliters of blood could reveal the identity of the killer.
FGFC.
The samples are marked for security, then taken away for examination. Blood is the body's front line of defense against disease. Many infections will show up here first. Mark Merchant of McNeese University in Louisiana is an expert on alligator blood and is conducting tests on its resistance to disease and infection.
We grew these microorganisms in culture in our laboratory, and we would challenge them with different amounts of alligator blood products to test what the effects were.
Merchant laces blood with bacteria and viruses to observe the reaction of the alligator's immune system.
What we found was amazing. We found that we tried 23 different types of bacteria, and the alligator blood had negative growth effects on all 23 types.
The alligator blood kills everything that Merchant and his team infect it with. Yet in some ways this is not surprising. Alligators are constantly battling with each other, inflicting massive injuries.
Alligators can be extremely aggressive toward members of their own species. And sometimes during these fights, they inflict serious injuries on one another, including loss of entire limbs.
The resulting wounds are open to constant infection from stagnant water, saliva, parasites, and foreign bodies.
But these enormous injuries heal most often without serious infection.
They could never survive these sorts of encounters unless their bodies were extremely resistant to infection. Although Merchant and his team infect the blood with E. coli, salmonella, and strains of bacteria that cause dysentery, none of the germs survive. The alligator blood behaves almost like a disinfectant, killing everything they throw at it. Under laboratory conditions, it even resists the HIV virus. Whatever is affecting the alligators, there is no sign of it in the blood. There are no significant differences between the sample from the zombie and blood found in healthy gators. The investigators have drawn another blank. But they still have the live specimen caught on the lake. That is where the team focus next. The zombie alligators drag their limbs as if they have no control over them, seemingly incapable of movement or thought. Perhaps the messages just aren't getting through from the brain. Time to examine the nervous system.
Some of the signs that we saw did suggest some neurological problems, and that became our next suspect.
The anesthetized animals are taken to the lab. Electrodes are inserted into the skin near major nerves. Using a series of small electrical charges, the scientists stimulate each nerve in turn. Healthy animals react predictably and rapidly by twitching the part of the body controlled by that particular nerve. But the reaction time of the zombie alligators is much, much slower and far more unpredictable. The team are onto something. The problem is rooted in the gator's nervous system. It's just that they have no idea what it is.
It's very unusual to see sick adult alligators in the wild. And unless they're beating up on each other, there's really not much else that's going to hurt an adult alligator.
A year after the first death, the mortality rate is 10 times greater than normal and still rising. Got to the point where there are too many bodies for the investigators to deal with. All they can do is mark them to show they've been counted, then leave them to decay.
It was a horrible sight out there to see some of the gators turned up. And they would come by and they'd spray paint them red, and that means that they'd had a count, a body count. But it was some awful big gators that died during this period.
You know, a dead reptile, especially one that weighs 1,000 pounds, is pretty smelly.
The lake carries the stench of death.
The fishing had become very bad at that particular point. Water quality was terrible. The odor was there not only from the dying carcasses of the gators, but just from the water itself.
Seemingly in an effort to avoid the rancid water, some alligators struggle out of the lake, dragging their back legs behind them. But soon, they too will die. They've been here for millennia. Their aggressive lifestyle and aquatic habitat have forced them to evolve incredibly powerful immune systems, a shield against invading microbes. But now they're struggling for survival. And whatever is creating the undead is also attacking the unborn.
Two good ones on top, but the rest of them look like they haven't developed at all.
Investigators examining every aspect of the alligators' lives find that even the eggs are being affected.
Hatch rates of alligator eggs on Lake Griffin have never been what we would consider optimum. We usually see 50 to 60% of the eggs hatching. We'd like to see 80% hatching.
But instead of an increase, Woodward sees an alarming decline in the number of eggs that are hatching.
We saw the hatch rates decline to less than 10%.
Something is attacking the adult from the inside, killing both the parent and the embryo. The outlook for Lake Griffin and its alligators is bleak. The team are no further forward with the investigation. The bodies of the animals revealed nothing. The blood tests, nothing. And though the neurological tests proved positive, there is still no reason why the symptoms are occurring. Woodward and his team remain mystified and frustrated. They decide there is only one place left to look. Inside the alligator's brain.
Really based on the observations of the biologists that had seen these animals alive, some of the clinical veterinarians that had done some of the tests, we knew that the brain was probably where we wanted to look. And so we began to focus more and more on that tissue.
The brain of an alligator is protected by a thick skull and tough skin.
An alligator is a tough animal, and the skull in these animals is very thick. It takes some expertise and some special equipment to get into the brain.
Not to mention brute force. But the operation is more delicate than it looks.
For us to look at it under the microscope, the brain's got to be virtually intact. It's a very small piece of tissue, and really we can't afford to damage it during the removal process.
This tiny piece of tissue is the alligator's brain. Weighing just 8 grams, it is no bigger than its eye. But this tiny organ could hold all the answers to this mystery. Once the brain is removed, the pathologists divide it into sections, distinct parts that they send away for processing.
When we look at the brain with our eyes, we don't see anything. It's not until we have those molecular tests and those virus tests in the microscope that we can really start to make inroads into what's going on.
Pathologists place tissue samples on a slide to be scrutinized under a high-powered microscope.
These microscope slides contain a slice of brain tissue that is basically 1/5000th of a millimeter in thickness. So we're able actually to look at it at very high magnification. Light passes through the tissue, and what we see is really a sea of pink that is normal brain tissue.
But look closer, and a series of complex patterns comes into view. Though these appear random, it is possible for the trained observer to spot abnormalities. Eventually, one scientist, Dr. Shob, starts to notice that some areas of the brain appear to be a lighter pink than normal.
When Dr. Shob looked at these tissues, he began to notice that in a specific area of the brain, the neurons, the cells that actually transmit the nervous signals, were dying and dead. There were areas of the tissue that were almost ghost-like. We see a pallor or paleness, where the tissue has literally dropped out and died. We're also able to go down at 1,000 times magnification and see individual neurons that have died. They've become shrunken and shriveled.
Shob and his team begin by observing what appears to be a normal brain with active neurons, blue in color, with a darker nucleus inside. But then they start noticing some that are bright pink, with no nucleus. The neurons here are dead.
It's very obvious under the microscope that those cells are no longer functioning.
And when they check the sample, they see it comes from the area of the brain that controls movement and balance. Suddenly the symptoms make sense.
Without those neurons, or with abnormal neurons, you can't transmit the signals that give you coordination, that allow you to swim appropriately. And these animals were basically, they were swimming without steerage.
In fact, the brain damage explains all the symptoms. The disorientation, the loss of balance, the nerve damage, and the drowning. Portions of the alligator's brains are dying, while the animals continue to live. This is the breakthrough the team have been waiting for. Real concrete evidence at last. But they're still no closer to finding a culprit. Nearly 100 of Lake Griffin's alligators have now died. Many have become zombies. Holes in the brains reveal the cause of death, but the identity of the attacker remains a mystery.
Initially, we were excited to find, hey, there's a problem. We know now that there's a lesion, an area of damage in the brain. And then it was a matter of figuring out what it was. And there's still a variety of things that could cause that.
The investigators turned their attention to the quality of the water in the lake.
And a lot of people suspected a poisoning, some sort of toxicity. The common ones being pesticides or herbicides, metals like mercury or lead. And so a lot of the investigations were centered around trying to find the source of this poison that was acting probably on the brain.
The St. Johns River Water Management District is assigned to test the lake. Overseeing the task force is Jeff Elledge.
What happened in Lake Griffin is that man's activities caused that lake to deteriorate rather rapidly over the course of 2 or 3 decades.
Lake Griffin was once a backwater, peaceful and tranquil, a safe haven for a broad array of wildlife. But then, 20th century life encroached. Wildlife was replaced by people, vegetation by housing. With people comes pollution.
People often think of a wastewater plant, where the sewage goes, as the pollution source, but it's only one of many possible sources. When a homeowner puts fertilizer on their lawn and irrigate their lawns, or when rain hits that lawn, part of that fertilizer is washing off into the lakes.
The attraction of living here is to have a property that backs onto the lake. Local residents pamper gardens that stretch right down to the water's edge. Fertilizers and pesticides are sprayed. Chlorine is used in swimming pools. Marine fuel in pleasure boats. Yet homeowners are not the only possible culprits.
Pollution can come from agriculture. They use fertilizer as well. They need that to grow crops.
Since the 1940s, canals were dug and huge tracts of marshland around the lake were drained and used intensively for agriculture. They were known locally as muck farms.
What a muck farm is, it's a farm that is on very organic soils. And the muck is actually vegetative material that is degrading. It's a very black, kind of oozy material, and it was very productive for agriculture.
One huge compost heap, perfect for growing crops. But to ensure its productivity, it was augmented with pesticides and fertilizers. Over 50 years, tons of these pollutants were pumped directly into the lake. In the 1990s, muck farms were phased out. Many of the pesticides they used to be banned by the US government years before. But their legacy lives on. The Pollutants lie dormant, wrapped up in the soils, slowly seeping back into the lake.
They aren't being used anymore, but they last a long time. Some of these may last 50 years or even longer in the environment.
Could this concoction of chemicals slowly seeping into the lake have something to do with the alligator deaths?
No one was sure what was causing it, but it was an indication there was something wrong in the environment. You know, alligators have been around for millions of years. You know, they're tough. But then all of a sudden we started to see these big mature alligators die. You know, that's an indication that we're really in some kind of environmental trouble.
In an attempt to assess the extent of the damage, water samples are taken from right across the lake.
We went out and actually measured the pesticide levels in the soils in the farms, and we also measured it in the water in the lake and the water going from the farms to the lake to see if those pesticides could still be there.
The investigators test for more than 50 of the most likely toxic substances. But when the results come through, the findings are uncanny.
The pesticides that were of concern were pretty tightly bound to the soils, and they were either in the sediments or they were still in the farms in the soils, but they weren't getting into the water column.
Pesticides and contaminants are present on the land surrounding the lake, but none of them seem to be finding their way into the water in any great amount. And they aren't finding their way into the alligators either.
The pesticide screens were negative. There was no evidence of mercury. There was no evidence of lead. There was no evidence of the common conditions that we attribute with abnormal brain function in animals.
All the tests we ran showed that pesticide levels were moderately low. And they weren't any different than any other time that we've ever measured pesticides on alligators in Lake Griffin. So nothing had really changed in terms of concentrations we were finding in alligators.
The liver, the kidney, the blood, all sort of pointed us away from pesticides or lead poisoning or mercury poisoning. So we had to look for other causes of brain damage.
But the water samples reveal something else astonishing. The water of Lake Griffin is teeming with an alien species of microscopic algae. The algae are not visible to the naked eye, but it's in the lake in unnaturally high concentrations. And that rings alarm bells.
We were seeing the appearance of certain algae that produce toxins. They call them cyanobacteria or cyanotoxins, and they're poisons.
When these tiny blue-green algae die, they release a cocktail of chemical toxins. Toxins that are well known for attacking the central nervous system. This can cause weakness, confusion, numbness, paralysis, brain damage, and even death. At last, the press has a culprit to blame. And the trail of evidence heads straight back to the muck farms.
Activities around the lake, agricultural activities, development activities, caused a flushing of nutrients into the lake. Nutrients are something that animals and plants need for survival, but in large amounts, they cause a richness or a density in the lake that triggers a change in the ecosystem.
These nutrients are saturating the lake to such an extent that suddenly blue-green algae runs wild.
And so we went from a lake that was much lower in nutrient levels, but had good populations of vegetation in the lake, to a lake that was dominated by algae.
Once the algae take hold, there's no way back. They become the driving force of the lake, overwhelming, choking, suffocating. Less competition means more nutrients for the algae. They become unstoppable. But as they die, they release neurotoxins into the water. And neurotoxins kill neurons. Over 2 years into the investigation, mortalities now in their hundreds, the team finally have a prime suspect. But once again, the evidence fails to support the theory.
The investigations showed that there were no cyanotoxins in the alligators, at least not in any concentration that could be harmful.
It's another frustrating conclusion to a promising lead. But there is to be one final twist. A chance encounter at a scientific conference in Maryland leads the Lake Griffin scientists to a compelling piece of evidence.
One of our colleagues was talking with Dale Honeyfield. They got to mentioning the types of work they were doing, and he mentioned that they were dealing with a salmon mortality event.
Honeyfield is heading up an investigation into abnormal deaths of salmon and trout in the Great Lakes.
They started comparing notes and found out some of these clinical signs that they were seeing were very similar.
Honeyfield's salmon appear to be suffering from a neurological disorder just before they die. He first notices the symptoms among the baby fish, or fry.
The fry would hatch, but then shortly after hatch, before they swam up for their first feeding, they would die.
Like Woodward and his team, Honeyfield had trouble identifying the cause.
We could not find any relationship with contaminants, with bacterial or viral infections. They were just dying. They seemingly were healthy otherwise.
But as he studies more adult fish, Honeyfield begins to see bizarre behaviors, just like those seen in the Lake Griffin alligators.
They lost equilibrium, rolled over, and sank to the bottom of the tank.
This footage from the time of the experiment shows that Honeyfield now has fish that can't swim. This leads him to test for neurological disorders, which takes him directly to the brain. He finds lesions, tiny holes in the salmon's brain, very similar to those found in the alligator. Areas of dead and dying nerve cells, now transmitting much slower chemical signals. But what is causing it? Honeyfield spends the next 6 years trying to find out. Having found no evidence of disease or pollution, he decides to look, not for something that is there, but for something that isn't. Could the disintegration of the brain be caused by the animal lacking an essential substance? He begins a series of tests in which he doses the lethargic salmon with a variety of chemical substances. One particular substance, called thiamine, has a profound impact.
When fry are affected, they're lethargic, they lay on the bottom of the tank, similar to what we see right here. It may not be real clear, but there's hemorrhaging around the gill and pericardium region. If you look at normal fry, they're up swimming in the water column, just as these are. They look bright, they're healthy, and if you take those fish that are in the previous slide and treat them with thiamine, within approximately an hour, they will be all back up in the water column. It's like magic.
This footage from Honeyfield's lab, shot at the time of the experiments, shows fish that were once close to death, suddenly healthy again.
Once the thiamine gets into their bodies, then they resume normal function.
The results are miraculous. Honeyfield has successfully pinned all the symptoms on a simple lack of thiamine, a natural substance otherwise known as vitamin B1.
Without vitamin B1, the body cannot process the energy that it needs for normal body function, for movement, for cell reproduction. The whole process shuts down.
In a healthy body, there is a constant turnover of cells. They die and are replaced. But brain cells are much slower to regenerate, and without thiamine, the body lacks the energy to replace them.
Vitamin B is essential for proper function of neurons. It actually protects the neurons, those cells in the brain that transmit the signals. And it actually has a function in producing the neurotransmitters, the chemical signals in the brain. So without thiamine, not only do you get abnormal neuron function, but you also, the cells themselves can die.
The holes found in the brains of the fish match those in the alligators.
It was almost unbelievable that, here they were in this, what a lot of people believed to be a very polluted lake, what a lot of people believed was probably a pesticide or some other nasty pollutant. And we're proposing that it's possibly a dietary deficiency, a nutrient deficiency of vitamin B.
To test the theory, Terrell is asked to go back to the bodies.
What I asked the folks in Florida to do was to send me some tissue samples of dead alligators and some healthy alligators so that I could look at the thiamine levels in their tissue. And what I found was that those alligators that were most impacted, that had neurological effects and motor skills that were most impacted, had the lowest level of liver and muscle thiamine.
We had no idea that a thiamine deficiency could occur in a wild population.
It was almost a crazy theory, because how do these wild animals in a wild environment eating a natural diet have a vitamin deficiency? It doesn't make evolutionary sense, it doesn't make ecological sense.
Although the lake has deteriorated, there is still plenty of food for the alligators. And there have been no new prey species introduced into the lake. So if the alligator's diet is to blame, just what is it they are eating? The only way to find out is to find a live alligator and pump its stomach. A reinforced plastic pipe is clamped between the animal's jaws, then taped into place. It is undignified, but there is no long-term damage to the alligator.
Perfect. You start to feel him full, Cameron. Just give him some pushes.
Fresh water is pumped into the gut while pressure is applied to the belly. The contents of the stomach come gushing out.
Good job. Here we go.
Over 7 months, alligators are captured, and all have their stomach contents examined. What the scientists find, in test after test, are the remains of one particular species. A fish called gizzard shad. Honeyfield, for one, is not surprised.
From my previous work, I knew that gizzard shad were very high in thymidase. Thymidase is an enzyme that destroys thiamine.
The pieces of the puzzle are coming together. The alligators have a thiamine deficiency. The shad are known to contain the enzyme thymidase, which destroys thiamine. Surely the shad must be the killer.
We tested that theory by actually feeding some alligators in a research study, gizzard shad, to see if it affected their thiamine levels.
The team capture 7 alligators and place them in a disused alligator farm. Over the next 12 months, they feed them 3 times a week on an exclusive diet of shad. Blood samples are taken regularly and sent away for analysis. Slowly, the alligators fed on shad begin to change. They become lethargic, their back legs paralyzed. They barely move. The tests are turning the alligators into the living dead. Zombies.
They found that all the alligators that ate the shad eventually had reduced thiamine levels in their system. That experiment really supported our hypothesis.
But alligators have always eaten shad. So why is thiamine A only affecting them now?
Gizzard shad numbers increased greatly and the other species were much lower. And so the biodiversity was less. And therefore the alligators did not have the opportunity of getting their vitamin pill in the form of these other animals.
Usually alligators get enough thiamine from their other foods. Just as with Honeyfield's fish, it doesn't matter if they ingest thiamine A's from the shad, as long as they get regular thiamine to bring them back to normal. The problems occur when they eat gizzard shad, almost exclusively. But the changing quality of the lake has brought about a massive increase in the shad, at the same time as a decline in other prey species, such as bass and bluegill.
You know, a fish that survives very well on eating bottom sediments and algae is shad. Well, the shad population exploded.
That fish is found in highly nutrient-rich lakes. It really likes those kind of conditions.
The more shad there are, the worse the situation will get. The authorities take a radical step. They extract the shad from all 9,000 acres of Lake Griffin.
And so we had this project to remove gizzard shad. Well, when we started harvesting the gizzard shad out of Lake Griffin, and the water quality was improving in Lake Griffin, the alligator stopped dying.
It took 6 years of intensive investigation by a team of scientists from 13 different agencies to arrive at this solution. But the shad did not commit the crime single-handedly. The deaths were caused by each and every one of the suspects. Firstly, people and mock farms colonized the region. Bit by bit, drop by corrosive drop, their chemical concoctions seeped into the lake to start a chain reaction. This paved the way for a toxic alien invader, an algal bloom which almost suffocated the fish. It killed all the plants and caused huge numbers of fish to die out. But one species found the new rancid conditions ideal. The gizzard shad ran amok in the now turbid and stinking waters of Lake Griffin. A chain of events triggered inadvertently by people, agriculture, and development ended in the death of hundreds of alligators and the demise of a lake. Gizzard shad, the murder weapon, but definitely not the murderer.